The first thing he hears is her breathing, shallow, deliberate. A soft pull of air that trembles like a silk thread stretched too tight. It echoes faintly through the unlit corridor, just enough to push cold prickles up the back of his neck. The young palace attendant Haru, barely 16, presses his palm against the lacquered wall, feeling the chill seeping through it like winter water through reeds. Outside, the storm howls against the eaves, making the paper shoji tremble in their frames. Yet inside this forbidden wing of the imperial residence, there's no movement, only breath. Haru closes his eyes, forcing himself to stay steady. The scent in the air burns his throat, dying candle wax, old incense, and the faint metallic trace of iron, as if someone had pressed a blade against the years themselves. Thunder rolls dull and distant, but it cannot drown out the whisper that follows. A voice hers, soft, feminine, measured. Keneal. The word slips through the crack beneath the grand cedar door ahead of him, curling around his ankles like smoke. His knees weaken instinctively. Every story he's heard about this chamber, about the one who rules it, presses itself into his chest until his breath turns thin. He should turn back. No servant is permitted here after sundown. No one is permitted here except those chosen. And those chosen never return unchanged. Another rumble of thunder. The corridor flickers with pale lightning. For a heartbeat, Haru sees the dust motes frozen in the air, tiny, suspended worlds caught between darkness and light. He exhales, slowly steadies his trembling hands, and inches forward. His bare feet glide over the cold tatami each step, releasing a dry whisper. Something shifts behind the door. A ragged inhale, a muffled sob, not hers. A woman's voice, young, choked, desperate. "But please." Haru's breath knots in his throat. His fingers twitch at his sides. Every instinct urges him to run, to flee down the spiraling hallways until the storm swallows him whole. But the message he carries, sealed with imperial wax and stamped with the crest of the inner bureau, becomes a weight pulling him forward. The corridor's final lantern sputters, casting the carved lotus pillars in restless shadows. A draft of cold air sweeps across his neck, raising goosebumps. Haru lifts his hand and places it against the door. The wood feels strangely warm, almost as if someone is standing on the other side with their palm pressed back. The sobbing stops. Silence, thick, unnatural, swallows the space between his heartbeat and the storm outside. Then a whisper, low and intimate, glides across the floorboards. "Enter." The door slides open with the soft hiss of silk-cutting air. Darkness greets him first. The chamber is lit only by a single candle, set deep within a bronze holder shaped like a lotus. Its flame struggles, barely illuminating the polished floor where faint outlines, chalk-like, circular, ritualistic, are drawn. The air is heavy with the smell of sweet incense layered atop something far older and colder, something that seems to seep from the stones themselves. At the center of the room, kneeling with her hands bound by a strip of crimson silk, is a young courtwoman he recognizes, Lady Aki, barely 17, her long hair unspooled over her shoulders like spilled ink. Tears stain her cheeks. Her breath trembles like reeds in winter wind. Behind her, standing perfectly still, is the Empress. Her silk kimono is midnight blue, embroidered with silver cranes that gleam in the candlelight, like spirits frozen mid-flight. Her hair, arranged in a lacquered headdress, casts long, angular shadows across her pale face. She does not look at Haru. She looks at Aki, as if the trembling girl were a single weak flame she intended to snuff out. Haru finds himself unable to breathe. The Empress raises her hand. The metal ornaments of her hairpiece chime softly, delicate, beautiful, and somehow unbearably threatening. Each sound feels like a pin pressed into the base of Haru's spine. "You bring a message," she says without turning. Her voice is emotionless, but the air around her tightens with each syllable. Haru kneels instantly, forehead to the mat. His hands shake as he extends the sealed parchment. Yes, your Imperial Majesty." A moment. A stillness so deep it feels like the world exhaled and stopped breathing. Then he hears movement, the rustle of silk, the soft scrape of her wooden gaita stepping closer. Haru keeps his eyes on the floor, terrified that even a single glance could shatter whatever fragile balance keeps him alive. A hand touches his chin, a single finger, cool as riverstone, lifting his face just enough for her to study him. Her eyes, dark and bottomless, gleam like the surface of a moonless pond. "You heard nothing?" she whispers. The candle flickers. Lady Aki lets out a tiny broken gasp. The Empress lowers her finger. "And you will forget everything." Haru nods quickly, though he knows the trembling in his bones has already made remembering unavoidable. He waits, praying she will release him. But instead she turns away and speaks softly toward Lady Aki. "Now, continue." Haru's blood turns to ice. The candlelight dims. The storm outside goes silent. And before he can move, before he can think, before he can even breathe, a sound begins in the darkness that will haunt him for the rest of his life. The storm that swallowed Haru's footsteps that night has long since passed, but the silence surrounding the Empress he served has endured for centuries. Her name appears in no official records. Her portraits were burned. Her personal chambers sealed her lineage, erased by decree. What remains are fragments, a handful of forbidden scrolls, censored diaries, temple ledgers with ink violently scratched out, and whispers preserved by those who feared her more than the passing of time. Historians refer to her only with a title never meant for the public ear, the Demon Empress. Yet even this name is incomplete. It reduces her to legend, obscuring the truth buried beneath layers of political revision, ritual secrecy, and imperial shame. The deeper one ventures into her surviving traces, the more the air thickens with a sense of deliberate concealment like dust stirred inside a sealed room. This investigation seeks to unearth what the Empire worked desperately to hide: the 7 intimate acts that defined her rule, scarred her victims, and poisoned the corridors of power. Acts carried out in whispered chambers behind shoji screens that absorbed more suffering than they ever revealed. Acts that blurred the boundary between personal desire, ritual obligation, and psychological domination. These accounts are not tales of gore. No blood-stained chronicles survive intact. What remains instead are impressions, trembling handwriting, the smell of incense trapped in warped parchment testimonies, recorded by monks whose hands shook as they wrote. Every recovered fragment insists on the same unsettling truth: these acts were never meant to be remembered. And yet, to understand the Empress, to understand the shadows she cast across her era, to understand why the Empire erased her, we must illuminate them, piece by suppressed piece. The world into which the Demon Empress emerged was already trembling long before her name was ever whispered. The late-Edo court, despite its lacquered splendor and ritualized serenity, was a place of tightened breath, muffled footsteps, and smiles carved too carefully into porcelain faces. Behind the gold leaf screens depicting cranes and pine forests, there were fractures, political, spiritual, and deeply human, hidden beneath layers of silk and ceremony. On the surface, the imperial palace glowed with elegance. Lanterns swayed softly in the night breeze. Incense drifted through corridors lined with pine-scented tatami. Courtiers in layered silk moved like brushstrokes from a master painter. But beneath that veneer lay an old anxiety. The shogunate's power overshadowed the throne-fracturing loyalties and spawning a culture of quiet desperation. Every gesture, every bow, every whispered rumor was a weapon. It was in this atmosphere, an empire choking on its own illusions of harmony, that the Empress made her ascent. The imperial residence was not merely a home, it was a labyrinth of obligations. Women of the court were raised within its walls as if they were porcelain dolls, valuable, fragile, easily replaced. They were confined to rituals that dictated how they walked, breathed, spoke, and dreamed. The Empress too had once been one of them. Records fragmented and half erased describe her as a girl of unusual stillness. While other court ladies laughed behind their sleeves or traded small rebellions in the form of sweets, snuck into hidden corners, she was quiet, observant. Her tutors described her presence as the stillness before a deep winter. This stillness followed her into adulthood. Before the palace ever recorded her existence, she appears briefly only 3 times in the chronicles of Gyogen Temple, a secluded mountain monastery known for its ascetic monks and its history of maintaining spiritual records of omens and unusual births. These entries, written in spare brushstrokes on rice paper that still carries the faint smell of cedar red: a girl born under a windless night, no cry, eyes open before her first breath. The final note, added by a different hand decades later, chills the page. She will return here. There's no record that she ever did. But the monks believed something had already bound her to them. The Empress's rise to power was swift, unexpected, and fraught with rumors. Surviving letters folded with trembling hands and sealed with wax cracked by age paint, a portrait of subtle dread. One lady in waiting wrote to her sister, "When she passes, the torches dim. It is as if she draws the light into herself." Another, signed only by MK, confesses, "I do not fear her actions, I fear her silence. She listens to everything as if the palace walls speak to her." Even a senior court noble, normally composed and precise, wrote in his diary after a midnight council session, "Her gaze lingers too long. When she speaks, the room contracts around her." These whispers accumulated like dust in forgotten corners, unseen but inescapable. The throne she ascended was embroiled in relentless turmoil. Factions within the noble families fought for influence with the shogunate, and every new alliance was cemented not with ink, but with marriages designed to stabilize the court. She became empress not through affection, but through necessity. Her union with the emperor was intended to soothe tensions among powerful clans. Yet the marriage never carried the warmth of companionship. Records indicate they spent little time together. The emperor, described by his physicians as gentle but sickly, withdrew more each year into ritual duties and scholarly pursuits. His nights were filled with the scent of medicinal herbs, the scratching of quill on parchment, and long silences that stretched like the corridors of his residence. The empress filled those silences with her own rituals, private, unrecorded, unsettling to those who found themselves drawn into them. Of all surviving documents, the diaries of the palace servants offer the most intimate glimpses into her presence. These diaries were never meant to be read. Their ink is smudged with tears, sweat, and hurried strokes made in dim rooms lit by dying candles. One such diary, belonging to a maid named Kinu, describes an evening when the empress summoned her after a ceremony. She placed her hand on the lacquered table, tracing a circle into the dust. She asked me if I had ever wanted something so deeply I feared the wanting would consume me. I said nothing. She smiled as if I had confessed everything. Kinu later notes the feeling that accompanied the empress. Her rooms were always cold, even in summer. Another servant, Takahiro, describes an incident where he delivered fresh robes at dawn. The incense had burned out hours earlier, but the scent lingered heavy and thick as if held in the air. She stood with her back to me. She did not move. When I stepped out, I realized I had been holding my breath. These accounts suggest a presence that unsettled even the routine fabric of palace life. Rumors spread beyond the inner residences, carried by kitchen servants, guards, and scribes who had never seen her, but felt her influence. They spoke of shadows that lingered too long, of shoji doors that slid open without sound of footsteps, that did not match the number of people in a room. One guard wrote anonymously, "We would take turns avoiding the eastern wing at night. Even the torches there seemed afraid to burn." Another described hearing a voice in an empty hallway, soft like silk brushing stone. Though easily dismissed as palace gossip, the consistency of these reports, found across separate documents from unrelated individuals, hints at a deeper unease. Piecing together her psychological portrait is difficult. Almost all direct accounts were destroyed during the Great Archival Purge, following her disappearance from the records. What remains are fragments that suggest a woman shaped by the suffocating hierarchy of palace life, the loneliness of ritualized existence, the burden of an emotionally distant marriage, the growing fear she inspired which isolated her further, a lifetime of being observed, judged, and silenced. One monk in a marginal note decades after her reign wrote, "She carried the stillness of a lake that hides a deep current." Whether that current was despair, resentment, hunger for power, or something more enigmatic is uncertain. The fear surrounding the empress did not erupt suddenly. It grew quietly like mold beneath tatami, unseen until it had spread too far. 3 events mark its progression. 1. The disappearance of Lady Hana. Lady Hana, a favorite companion of the empress, vanished overnight. No body was found, no explanation was offered. In the months that followed, courtiers noted that the empress wore Hana's favorite hair ornament, a silver crane with delicate wings. It gleamed whenever she turned her head. 2. The emperor's withdrawal. The emperor became increasingly frail. His physicians noted that he suffered from recurring nightmares. One physician wrote, "He wakes trembling, whispering of a presence standing over him." 3. The silent wing. A portion of the eastern residence was closed without public explanation. Servants began calling it the silent wing. Those assigned to clean it reported strange sensations, cold air, lingering incense, and a feeling of being watched through the shoji screens. Within a year, the wing was sealed entirely. The clearest glimpse into the empress's reign comes from a hidden set of notes found beneath the floorboards of the scribe's office. Written by a man named Shunpei, they were discovered during a renovation nearly 200 years later. One passage stands out. She asked me to record her words, but never to ink them. I wrote them in water on parchment. The marks vanished within breaths. She said that was enough. Another, "There's a room where no one may enter. Inside she keeps her secrets. I hear movement." And the final note, written with a quill that snapped mid-stroke. If her 7 acts are ever uncovered, the Empire's illusion of order will fracture. She knows this. She waits. By the time whispers of her 7 intimate acts began circulating first, as rumors among the servants, later as fearful speculation among nobles, the palace had already begun reshaping its narrative. The Empress's presence was increasingly treated as a source of shame. Officials avoided her gaze. Monks invoked protective sutras when her name was mentioned. The emperor grew weaker. And then, without announcement, her name disappeared from palace documents altogether. It was as if she had been erased while still alive. What remained was the unease, the lingering incense in abandoned rooms, the tremor in servants' voices, the faint chalk-like marks discovered beneath tatami mats, long after her chambers were sealed. History had begun its slow, deliberate process of burying her. But fragments resisted burial. Fragments survived. And from those fragments, the 7 acts emerge, piece by forbidden piece. The first act does not begin with violence. It begins with silence, the kind that hangs like frost on pine needles before dawn. The account comes from the diary of Lady Aki, preserved only because she hid its pages behind a loose stone in the foundations of an unused tea room. Most of her writing is ordinary: the scent of plum blossoms in the courtyard, the rustle of silk during ceremonies, her longing for the life she might have lived outside the palace walls. But one entry differs. The ink is darker. The brushstrokes tremble as if guided by a shaking hand. She writes of a night when the Empress summoned a group of 5 attendants, including herself, to the silent wing. They were told to kneel on cushions, arranged in a perfect circle around a lacquered box. The tatami beneath them felt colder than usual, as though it had been left untouched by warmth for decades. The Empress entered without footsteps. The lanterns dimmed, though no wind stirred them. Her presence carried a scent of burned cedar and fading incense, a fragrance that seemed to linger even after breathing it in. From the lacquered box, she removed strips of crimson silk, each embroidered with the silver outline of a crane. One by one, she tied the silk around the attendants' wrists. The fabric felt warm, almost alive, as if it pulsed faintly with each heartbeat. Her voice was soft, but the room contracted with every syllable. "Speak your deepest longing," she instructed. No one moved. The silence pressed down like a weight. Lady Aki wrote. My throat closed. The others trembled. Yet she waited with the patience of stone. One girl whispered her wish to see her family again. Another wished to marry for love. Another dreamed of being free. The Empress listened without judgment. Then she smiled. I knew then we had made a mistake. The Empress leaned forward, placing her fingers on each silk-bound wrist. The metal ornaments in her hair chimed softly, echoing like distant bells. When she spoke again, her breath brushed their skin, cool, delicate, terrifying. Your wishes are mine now. The attendants felt the silk tighten, though no one had touched it. Aki wrote that the knot seemed to constrict with each inhale she took, as if the silk were learning the rhythm of her breath. When the Empress finally removed them, the girl's wrists were marked, not bruised, but imprinted with faint white outlines resembling wings. Those marks vanished within days, but their dreams changed. Aki's final line reads, I no longer dream my own dreams. No one knows what the Empress did with those confessions, but this was her first act, not domination of the body, but quiet possession of the mind. The second act is found not in diaries, but in temple records, specifically confessions given by junior monks at Gyogen Temple during a winter season of unusual tension. One monk, Sosei, aged 20, reported hearing a woman's voice chanting beneath the temple at night. The words were indistinct, but carried the cadence of court incantation rather than Buddhist sutra. He described the voice as soft as breath on cold glass. Another monk claimed that during meditation, he felt someone sit beside him on the tatami. The sensation of silk brushing his shoulder was unmistakable, but when he opened his eyes, the meditation hall was empty, save for a faint trace of ceremonial incense that did not belong to the temple. The monks believed the Empress was performing a forbidden act from afar, a ritual of presence, allowing her spirit to slip between spaces and observe without being seen. Months later, a sealed scroll was discovered in the temple library during an inventory. The scroll, unsigned, written in a hurried and uneven hand, contains the following lines. The Empress came to us in veiled form. She does not walk here, yet she is here. She asks questions we dare not answer. She listens for truths we try to hide. And finally, we felt her breath, though she cast no shadow. Was this supernatural psychological a projection of fear? Perhaps. But the chilling consistency across testimonies suggests something more. The Empress had learned to wield intimacy, not as affection, but as intrusion. Her whispered presence crawled across the boundaries of sanctity entering the monk's spiritual refuge. She did not touch them. She merely lingered beside them, stealing the quiet their vows required. That was the second act, the intimate violation of sacred space presence, without form, breath, without body. The third act emerges from a hidden document, a letter never delivered, found still sealed in the ruins of a minor noblewoman's estate. The letter was written by Lady Ren, age 19, a lady-in-waiting assigned to the Empress during the winter of her 3rd year. Ren describes a night when she was awakened by a soft tap on her shoji door. When she slid it open, the corridor was bathed in moonlight, pale and cold. A servant awaited her silent, except for the sound of his breathing, shallow and quick. "The Empress requests your presence," he whispered. Ren followed him into the silent wing. The palace was quiet, too quiet. Even the cicadas outside seemed to hush themselves when she passed. The scent of melting candle wax and cold tatami grew stronger the deeper they walked. The Empress waited alone in a room lit only by the moon. A lacquered basin of water sat before her, the surface still as glass. She motioned for Ren to kneel. Ren obeyed, though her palms glistened with sweat. "Touch the water," the Empress commanded. Ren dipped her fingers into the basin. The water was ice cold, yet beneath the cold she felt something else movement, as if something stirred deep below the surface. The Empress leaned close, her breath brushing Ren's ear. "Tell me what you fear most." Ren tried to speak, but the movement beneath the water intensified, coiling around her fingers like unseen silk. She gasped. "I fear," her breath caught, "that nothing I feel belongs to me anymore." The Empress smiled. The basin stilled. Ren withdrew her hand, trembling. In her letter she wrote, "I felt watched from inside the water. Not by her, but by something that knew her. What makes this act horrifying is not physical harm, but psychological disassembly. The Empress created a ritual in which fear was drawn out, exposed, and used as a tether. Fear is confession. Confession is binding. Ren died, young records say, an illness of breath, though many suspect she simply stopped speaking until her voice withered from disuse. By this point, rumors of the Empress's rituals had spread throughout the palace. Servants spoke in hushed tones, avoiding certain corridors after sunset. Even senior attendants found excuses to remain near populated chambers. Yet one act stands out for its eerie intimacy, recorded by a low-ranking attendant named Chio, whose diary survived by accident hidden inside a hollow compartment of a broken trunk. Chio writes of being summoned during a rainstorm. The corridors were dim, lit only by trembling lanterns that cast shadows like flowing ink across the walls. Each step felt muffled by the storm, as if the palace itself were holding its breath. She entered the Empress's chamber expecting a simple request. Instead, she found the Empress seated before a large folding screen, painted with cranes drifting across misty mountains. A candle burned behind the screen, casting the Empress's shadow onto the rice paper. But the shadow moved differently. When the Empress inclined her head, the shadow turned away. When she lifted her hand, the shadow lowered its own. Chio froze. The Empress finally spoke. "I have learned to divide myself." She motioned for Chio to approach. Terrified Chio did. The shadow leaned forward on its own, stretching across the screen until it reached the tatami before Chio's feet. Chio felt something brush her toes, cold, soft, weightless. She wrote, "It felt like breath made of darkness." The Empress whispered, "Offer it your name." Chio refused. The shadow wavered its shape, contorting as if in frustration. The Empress's tone hardened. "You cannot deny what you owe." Chio fled, and for days afterward she felt a faint pressure at her back, as if a second breath exhaled whenever she inhaled. This act remains the most debated among historians. Some believe it metaphorical, a collapsing psyche projected onto servants. Others suggest an early form of psychological manipulation via staged illusions. But Chio's words persist. She had a shadow that did not belong to her, or perhaps she belonged to it. The fifth act focuses not on noble women, but on 3 palace servants commoners, whose names would have disappeared entirely if not for a monk's private record, preserved in a remote mountain archive. Their names Haru 16, Mio 14, and Daichi 17. They were assigned to night duty in the eastern corridors, where few dared to tread. According to the monk's notes, the Empress summoned them individually over several months. What unites their testimonies is a pattern of enforced silence. Haru's account. Yes, the same Haru from the cold open. He claimed that whenever the Empress approached him, the sound around him died. Not quieted, died. The crackling of lantern flames ceased. His own heartbeat felt distant. Even the soft rustling of his kimono against tatami became muted, as if swallowed. "She made the world smaller," he whispered in confession years later. Mio's account. Mio told the monk that the Empress would sometimes appear behind her in the laundry chambers. She would place a cool hand on Mio's shoulder and say nothing. But Mio felt as though entire conversations once she could not remember had already taken place. I would blink and feel I had forgotten something important, she confessed. Daiichi's account. Daiichi reported the worst. He claimed the Empress once circled him slowly in an empty courtyard at dusk, the light fading behind her until it seemed she carried darkness with her. She stopped before him, placed 2 fingers against his lips and whispered, "You will speak only when I breathe." And when she inhaled, he could speak barely. When she exhaled, his voice died mid-word. For days afterward, Daiichi spoke in short, trembling breaths, as if afraid the air belonged to her. Historians refer to this as the binding of the quiet ones, a ritual of control so intimate that it reshaped the victim's relationship with their own voices. Yet none of them reported physical harm, only the silent theft of something deeply human. The 6th act stands as the most documented, yet the least understood. It appears in the tattered notes of a court scribe, the memories of one surviving attendant, and even in an official edict issued months later, one ordering the destruction of certain palace artifacts associated with ill omen. The Empress held a private ceremony in a sealed chamber where she had arranged 7 crane figurines, each carved from pale wood and placed atop individual lacquered pedestals. The chamber smelled of cold stone and unburned incense. The air was thick, stale, unmoving. One attendant, Lady Suzume, was forced to assist. She described how the Empress moved silently among the figurines, touching each one with a fingertip. Every time she did, Suzume felt a ripple of pressure in her chest, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers, pulsing beneath her ribcage. The Empress whispered, "Each crane holds a truth taken from those who served me." With her nail, she traced delicate cuts along the wings of the figurines. Suzume insisted that when wood split, she heard not the sound of carving, but a soft gasp, as if something inside the figurines breathed. The Empress turned to her and said, "Truth is most powerful when stolen gently." Suzume fled days later, abandoning her position, leaving behind her robes, combs, and personal items. She never returned to court. Her family reported that she refused to be near wooden objects for the rest of her life. This act, the ritualistic collecting of stolen truths, was the first time palace officials intervened, though quietly and far too late. The 7th act is the darkest. It is the one that reshaped everything and the one most aggressively erased. It centers on a chamber not listed in any architectural record, the Heartroom. Archaeologists rediscovered it centuries later, but its origin traces back to this act. According to the fragments of a confession written by the Empress's personal scribe Shunpei, she built a room where breath could not escape, where her desires echoed back to her, where she made others feel what she felt. The scribe describes a ritual involving a single victim at a time chosen from attendants who had previously served her closely. The victim would be brought into the chamber at night. The walls were bare wood, lacquered so dark they reflected only faint glimmers of candlelight. A small altar held a single unlit lantern. The Empress would sit beside the victim, almost touching but never quite making contact. She would speak softly, not asking questions, but narrating her own emotions: despair, loneliness, hunger for understanding. The victim's breath would deepen, their pulse would slow. Then she would whisper, "Feel what I feel." And they did. Not by magic, but by the crushing intimacy of a woman who had spent her entire life denied the right to express herself. She emptied her emotions into others until they broke beneath the weight she had carried since childhood. Victims left the chamber pale, trembling, unable to articulate the emotions that overwhelmed them. Some collapsed, others grew withdrawn, a few disappeared. This final act was not an act of cruelty alone. It was a confession twisted into ritual, weaponized into domination. The Empress wanted to be understood, but in seeking that understanding, she consumed the inner lives of those around her. And then suddenly she stopped. Her rituals ended, her presence faded. Within months she vanished from all records. No one knows how or why. But the Heartroom remained, waiting. For centuries, the palace stood silent about the Empress. Its walls repainted its rooms, repurposed its memories, rebuilt like carefully tended gardens designed to hide the roots beneath. But history has ways of forcing its return, especially when the earth itself decides to exhale what was buried. It began during a renovation of the eastern wing, where construction workers noticed a hollow resonance beneath the tatami. The floor, supposedly uniform, had a single patch that responded like a sealed chest. When they lifted the mats, they found not floorboards, but a square panel, lacquered black, its surface unmarred by age. Even dust hesitated to cling to it. The panel was pried open. A breath of cold air escaped, sharp metallic tinged with incense so old it had lost its sweetness and turned bitter. Below was a chamber, small, lightless, perfectly preserved. The Heartroom. Archaeologists descended the narrow steps, their lanterns casting gold halos that faltered, as if unwilling to illuminate what lay beneath. The chamber's walls were covered in a lacquer so dark it absorbed light-swallowing reflections. But the true discovery sat in the center, a folded silk bundle untouched by decay. Its threads were crimson, embroidered with cranes whose wings curled inward as if shielding something fragile. When unwrapped, the contents revealed. A wooden figurine of a crane cracked through the center. A small bronze mirror darkened beyond use. A scroll sealed with wax bearing an imperial crest long purged from records. The scroll's surface smelled faintly of old candle smoke and damp cedar scents that seemed to pulse in the still air. When unsealed, its ink appeared startlingly fresh, as though written by a hand that had only just lifted the brush. The calligraphy was delicate, deliberate, and the words were hers. The Empress's confession. Not of crimes, not of rituals, but of longing. She wrote of being raised in silence, of being shaped into an ornament of power, yet denied any human closeness. She described how the palace consumed her, how the emperor feared her quiet, how the nobles watched her, not with admiration, but apprehension. She wrote, "They gave me a crown, but never a voice. They taught me ceremony, but denied me truth." Her 7 intimate acts, she claimed, were not punishments, they were attempts to feel through others what she had been forbidden to feel herself. Fear, desire, grief, yearning, loneliness. And then the final line, "If I could not share my heart, I would make them hold it for me." The chamber fell silent after the scroll was read, not because the truth absolved her, not because it condemned her, but because for the first time in centuries, the Empress finally spoke, and history was forced to listen. When the Heartroom was resealed, it was not out of fear, though fear certainly lingered in the breaths of every scholar, monk, and historian who stepped inside. It was sealed because the chamber represented something the Empire had never been prepared to face, a woman who refused to let silence shape her entirely. The Empress's actions, twisted, intimate, unsettling, were expressions of a spirit that had been pressed so tightly beneath ritual and expectation that it fractured the moment she reached for connection. Her victims carried her weight, yes. They trembled beneath her desire to be felt, yes. But their suffering was born from the same unyielding machinery that shaped her, a system designed to manufacture beauty at the cost of humanity. Power did not corrupt her, power isolated her, and isolation sharpened into desperation. History prefers neat villains and noble heroes, clean lines of morality inked onto scrolls that can be read by candlelight without discomfort. But real power, the power sealed in chambers, whispered through corridors, exhaled in the quiet between rituals, is never clean. It stains what it touches. It dissolves borders between tenderness and cruelty, longing and possession, intimacy and domination. The Empress's 7 acts remind us that those who are denied expression often learn to carve it violently into the world around them. Her rituals were not the expressions of a demon, but the echoes of a woman who had never been allowed to speak, until silence was all she had left to manipulate. Her victims survived in fragments, trembling handwriting, incomplete testimonies, lingering incense trapped in forgotten cloth. Their memories, fragile yet enduring, became the true record of her reign. And perhaps that is why the Empire erased her name, not because she was monstrous, but because she forced the court to confront its own monstrosities reflected back through her. Today the Heartroom sits beneath layers of stone and secrecy untouched, except by those who seek its truth. The lacquer still absorbs light, the air still tastes faintly of incense that died centuries ago. And if one listens long enough, one might imagine hearing a faint breath lingering in the dark, a reminder that some hearts refuse to be buried. In the end, only one line remains echoing from her confession. What is forgotten waits,